Seconds. That's how long it took. 30 seconds from the moment.
The Boeing 787 Dreamliner has a stellar safety record. This is the first fatal crash. So, what could have gone wrong? When investigators finally cracked open the black boxes from Air India Flight 171, they weren't expecting what came next. What they uncovered didn't just answer questions, it raised entirely new ones. And as those answers started coming to light, the world realized that this wasn't just a tragic accident. It was a wake-up call for the global aviation industry. On June 13, just a day after the devastating crash in Ahmedabad, recovery teams located both the flight data recorder and cockpit voice recorder buried under layers of wreckage and structural debris. And though charred and dented from the heat and impact, both recorders were intact enough to promise one thing: the truth. The devices were rushed under police escort to a high-security aviation lab in New Delhi, and from there, they were carefully examined by India's Aircraft Accident Investigation Bureau, or AIB. But this wasn't just a local effort. Within 24 hours of the crash, experts from the US National Transportation Safety Board, NTSB, and the UK's Air Accident Investigation Branch, AIB, were flown in to assist. The aircraft was American-made, a Boeing 787, and it had British nationals aboard. Under the International Aviation Treaty known as the Chicago Convention, any country involved in aircraft manufacturing or victim nationality had a right to join the probe. This was a rare, massive, multinational operation, and there was a lot riding on it. Inside the lab, investigators got to work analyzing over 2,200 parameters from the flight data recorder and the final 2 hours of audio from the cockpit voice recorder. What they found was staggering. In the final 60 seconds before impact, the cockpit was a flurry of confusion and alarm. It began just 22 seconds after takeoff. One pilot says, "Gear up," and the co-pilot confirms. But right after that, there's a chilling pause, a warning chime, then another, a stall warning. The pilots began exchanging rapid, overlapping commands, but something was wrong. The aircraft wasn't climbing. The angle of attack was too steep, and the engines were running, but the lift was gone. The crew calls Mayday in a calm but urgent tone just once, and then silence, broken only by the audible efforts to regain control. What struck investigators was the calmness, because they didn't know yet what they were facing. They had no time to. Then came the flight data, and with it, the first clear explanation. Just 14 seconds after takeoff, the flaps, which help generate lift during low-speed flights, were fully retracted. That's far too early. And with insufficient airspeed, the aircraft lost lift and stalled. The pilots never stood a chance. But here's the twist: the cockpit instrument still showed that the flaps were extended. That meant that the crew believed they were in a safe configuration, but they weren't. They were flying blind, misled by a system that was supposed to protect them. And that's when the real storm began. Aviation experts worldwide started pointing fingers, many of them aimed straight at Boeing. The situation was disturbingly reminiscent of the 737 MAX disasters in 2018 and 2019, where software failures led to 2 fatal crashes. And 2025 has already been a brutal year for Boeing as well. In January, a 737 MAX 9 lost its entire door plug mid-flight over Oregon. A hole ripped open in the cabin wall. The bolts were never installed. Boeing's CEO resigned. The FAA froze MAX production. And in May, a Boeing 737-200 cargo jet was shot down over Darfur. Everyone on board died. Now, this wasn't a mechanical failure, but it was one more Boeing headline in a year already spinning out of control. And then came June 12, the first fatal crash of a Dreamliner, Air India 171. 3 major Boeing incidents in 6 months. And the pattern doesn't end there. Not long before that, whistleblower John Barnett, who'd spent years raising red flags about ignored safety warnings, was found dead in a hotel parking lot. Official word: suicide. But inside the aviation world, trust cracked. People stopped calling it a coincidence. And though the Dreamliner is a different aircraft, the pattern was uncomfortably familiar. Automated systems misfiring, pilots misled, lives lost. Critics accuse Boeing of fostering what they called automation arrogance, designing systems that assume software will always be right while failing to ensure pilots are fully informed or able to override in time. In the case of Flight 171, the faulty flap reading suggested that either a sensor or actuator fed incorrect data to the cockpit, masking the real configuration. The Boeing 787's flap control system is supposedly fail-safe, equipped with redundant torque motors and encoders. But one sensor failure combined with deferred maintenance, may have been all it took. Now, while not confirmed publicly, inner sources suggested that just 1 month prior, the left-wing flap actuator had been serviced due to sluggish retraction reports. Parts were replaced, but due to a shortage, not all components were brand new. Some were overhauled units, technically within tolerance, but still refurbished. There are also some insiders claiming that a torque sensor calibration check had been deferred during the service window due to missing equipment. Deferred, but not flagged for follow-up. On paper, these were routine events. In reality, they might have been fatal. Investigators also looked at whether this malfunction could have triggered a failure cascade. As in, did the faulty flap reading mislead the aircraft's computer system? Did the autothrottle behave differently? These weren't just theoretical concerns. Data confirmed that the autothrottle responded as if the aircraft was already climbing normally. The engines were delivering the expected thrust, but with the wings producing far less lift than the system assumed, the angle of attack increased rapidly, leading to the stall and descent. In other words, the aircraft believed it was flying correctly. The pilots believed it was flying correctly. And it wasn't. This created a chilling conclusion. The safeguards didn't just fail, they misinformed. Public frustration boiled over. Whistleblowers pointed to the past quality control lapses at Boeing's Charleston plant, where many 787s are assembled. Former engineers claimed that the production was rushed, inspections were skipped, and cost pressures dominated over safety concerns. The FAA's controversial delegation of safety oversight to Boeing's own employees under the ODA program came under renewed fire. A former Boeing engineer told the BBC, "This isn't just a technical glitch. It's a system failure at every level." The international reaction to these findings was swift. The FAA issued an immediate bulletin to all US-registered Boeing 787 operations requiring a recheck of all flap position encoders and torque motor feedback circuits. The European Union Aviation Safety Agency, or EASA, followed suit within 48 hours. Back in India, the Directorate General of Civil Aviation, or DGCA, ordered an urgent audit with all 787 Dreamliners in the country. Here, India grounded for aircraft for deep system checks, and at least 2 jets were found to have anomalies in flap motor performance, although not as critical. Still, it was enough to ring alarm bells. The Tata Group, which owns Air India, responded with a promise of total transparency and absolute cooperation and pledged a fleet-wide inspection protocol beyond DGCA's minimum requirement. Behind the scenes, international memos suggested the company was shaken not just by the loss, but by the implications. And this wasn't just about a single crash. It was about whether their entire Dreamliner fleet, once hailed as the future of Indian aviation, could still be trusted by the public. They also set up a crisis support fund. Compensation for each victim's family has already been announced, 1 crore rupees, or about $120,000. But this new fund would cover additional support, counseling services, long-term medical aid for the sole survivor, and relocation assistance for the families of 33 people killed on the ground. But the investigation wasn't over. 3 weeks after the black box analysis, a preliminary report was released. Investigators emphasized that while pilot error couldn't be entirely ruled out, the focus was on mechanical and systematic failures. A few days later, Boeing issued a global maintenance advisory, urging checks on flap actuator feedback encoders and calling on operations to ensure that deferred maintenance tasks involving flap systems would close immediately. But for many, this wasn't enough. Aviation analysts warned that Boeing's brand, already under pressure, could suffer even more if systemic issues weren't addressed. The company's stock took a noticeable dip after the crash, and although the Dreamliner had previously enjoyed a strong safety record, trust was beginning to erode. Meanwhile, global pilot unions and flight instructors called for a renewed focus on manual flying skills. Over the past decade, as aircraft have become more automated, pilots have had less time and less training to handle rare but deadly malfunctions. Associations began lobbying for updated training that includes managing misleading cockpit data and flying without automation when needed. As of now, the full investigation is expected to take another 3 to 4 months, with a final report due by November. The international teams remain involved, with forensic engineers still analyzing recovered components and digital data streams. Meanwhile, families continue to wait for answers, for closure, for anyone, to say, "We know what happened and it won't happen again." And as for Vishwas Romsh, the lone survivor, who was seated in 11A and miraculously survived the crash, while his younger brother AJ Romsh, sitting just across the aisle, lost his life. Vishwas solemnly carried his brother's coffin during the funeral, a deeply emotional moment witnessed worldwide. He is now dealing with overwhelming survivor's guilt, regretting what happened. "If I had known, I would have switched seats." Maybe that's the real heart of this story. Not just the black boxes or the data or the mechanical jargon, but the human side, the families, the survivor, the people on the ground. People who didn't ask to become part of aviation history, but now are. If the final report confirms what early findings already suggest, that a flawed sensor system, misleading cockpit data, or deferred maintenance led to this crash, then Boeing won't just be dealing with lawsuits. They will be dealing with a collapse of trust. And after the 737 MAX crisis, the company promised change. But if critical failures still exist in their most advanced jets, Boeing's not just at risk of financial fallout, it's at risk of losing the one thing that an aircraft maker can't survive without: credibility. If this story moved you or made you question the systems we trust, hit subscribe. We cover what others gloss over, and we do it with one goal: keeping you informed.